We're going to be looking at Judges, and the book of Judges, I think, is one of my favorite books of the whole Bible, because the book of Judges presents to us a world that is absolutely a mess. It's a book that presents to us a picture, I think, into 2018 for this reason. And what we're going to be doing this week is we're going to be looking at how we as Christadelphians, living in this Canaanite world, if you will, how we can deal with the messes that are all around us. We're going to be looking today at the Canaanites, where they came from, what they were about, what their ideology was. Tomorrow we're going to look at knowing our enemy, how we can deal with the Canaanites, how we can deal with their way of thinking. And then we're going to deal with what a judge is. And when we look at what a judge is, we're going to see that there's really two sides to being a judge. There's the do what I say part of being a judge. That's the easy part. And there's the do what I do part of being a judge, where the judge actually goes out and actually does the work of saving the people that are living in the mess. And then we're going to look at a couple of character studies from the book of Judges. We're going to look at Deborah and Barak. And when we look at that, we're going to look at different people and how they responded to the call to come out and help fight against the Canaanites. And then we're going to look at Gideon. We're going to end the week looking at Gideon, where there's one man, he was called, and he himself had to take the initiative, and he had a hard time doing that because he was afraid, it seems, of standing up and fighting against the Canaanites, but how God develops him and prepares him to actually fight against the Canaanites. So that's kind of what we're going to do this week, and today we're going to start out then looking at the Canaanites. And like I said, this is one of my favorite books. When I started out years and years ago looking at the book of Judges, I was really excited about the stories that take place, about the heroes of the book of Judges. I found them fascinating to see the things that they did, and they're very, very exciting. But as time's gone by, what I found is that there's just a whole bunch of people that are failing. There's a whole bunch of people that are having a hard time in the book of Judges. And I could relate to that, because sometimes my life is a mess itself. And sometimes I follow the ways of the Canaanites instead of following the right ways. And sometimes it takes a brother or a sister to come to me and to save me from that condition. And hopefully as the week progresses, we will be able to be better brothers and sisters, helping each other to fight against the Canaanites, because it's certainly not just a battle for one. It's a battle for the whole ecclesia. It's a battle that we all have to deal with. Now, if we look at the world around us, we find a world that's really going downhill extremely fast. It seems like in the last 10 years with the internet just really getting up to speed, it seems like problems and morality in the world has gone downhill at a very rapid pace. And I used to think, you know what? If we just hold on and keep doing the things that we're supposed to be doing, the things that we've been doing, we'll be all right, because Christ is going to come back soon. It'll be good, and if we just keep holding on. But I'm becoming more and more convinced that that's not good enough. We've got to find new ways to deal with Canaanite thinking in our lives. We've got to do that. We've got to, because if Christ remains away for another 5 years or 10 years, we're really going to be in a mess in Christadelphia. So we've got to step up and we've got to find ways to deal with problems. And it's not like there's any one solution, but it's things that each of us can do working together in order to find those solutions. So we look at the Canaanites, and what we're going to see this morning is that the Canaanites were people that did what was right in their own eyes, because they had no connection with God at all. They had no interest in God, and so they did what was right in their own eyes. Now, what was bad about that was, guess who else started to do what was right in their own eyes? Right? The Israelites. They found themselves, and that's really the summary phrase of the book of Judges, is that the people did what was right in their own eyes. So they fell down to that same level of the Canaanites. What does that tell us about the dangers that we face in the ecclesia? Right? It's the same thing. It's the same dangers that they faced, we're facing in 2018. Now, the leading edge of the Canaanites, what the Canaanites were really famous for, if you do a study on it, the Canaanites were famous for their sexual immorality. Even the nations around them that weren't Israel, those nations around them noted the sexual immorality of the Canaanites. Window, 2018. Right? That's a picture of our world today. I want to just kind of go through some history with you that I've experienced in my life, looking at the decline of the morality of the world around us. Right? So when I was just coming of age, when I was just becoming an adult, divorce was not that common. It happened, but it wasn't that common. Today, half of marriages in the United States will end in divorce. When I was coming of age, fornication and adultery were considered to be absolutely wrong. Now, that didn't mean that people didn't do those things, but it was considered wrong. Today, half of all people getting married have already lived together in the United States. I wonder if that half goes with the other half that we just talked about. Homosexuality today is actually being promoted in this country, especially in the state of California. I'm not so sure about Oregon, but in California it is being promoted as a good thing. And lined up behind that is gender fluidity. What's gender fluidity even, right? Well, my daughter goes to college and she's taking a child development class, and she comes home and tells me about the fact that in the school system now, in California, that children are being not allowed, they're actually expecting children not to choose their gender until they get to a certain age. And so when children come into school, they're not treated as if they're boys or girls. They actually have to decide that when they get to an age when they're old enough to decide. Yeah, it's a mess. Now, the Canaanites, I don't think, went that far, but they had everything else in the land of Canaan. So what we're going to do then is we're going to look this morning at these Canaanites and their history to see if we can figure out what makes them tick, and maybe we can recognize the danger that we face in our life. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 7. It says, verse 1, and right, these are super familiar verses to all of us. When Yahweh the God shall bring thee into the land whither thou goest to possess it, and hath cast out many nations before thee, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, right? That's that fun verse. There's many like it to read. 7 nations greater and mightier than thou. Thou shalt smite them, utterly destroy them. Thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor show mercy unto them. Neither shalt thou make marriage with them. Thy daughter thou shalt not give unto his son, nor his daughter shalt thou take unto thy son. Now, we've just finished in kids camp looking at Joshua. And the whole book of Joshua is about this, isn't it? About driving out the Canaanites. That's what it's all about. We find similar verses to what we just read in Exodus. We find them again in Leviticus. We find them in Numbers, and we find them there in Deuteronomy. The same idea over and over and over again. God saying, don't make covenants with the Canaanites. Don't try to live peaceably with the people of the world around you. Don't show mercy to them. Don't allow their ways to persist. Right? They've got to be removed from our lives. And don't make marriages with them. He says, for if you do, verse 4, they will turn away thy son from following me. So if you do this, what you're going to find is your kids are not going to come into the truth. Your kids, either if they're in the truth, will leave the truth, or they just won't come in to the truth. It says that they may serve other gods. They're going to have different interests, and they're not going to find the scriptures interesting. That's what will happen if you actually follow that path. So what do we know about the Canaanites? When I started this study, I thought, so what do I know about the Canaanites? Where do they come from? What's their history? What's their story? So there's the land of Canaan in pink there. You'll be familiar with that. And you can see all the different nations of Canaan, and they're all spread out throughout the whole land. What we find in the Bible, because the term Canaan, or the Canaanites, it means a whole bunch of different things. It can mean one little nation of the Canaanite people. It can mean the whole geographical area that you see on that map. That's also referred to as Canaan or Canaanites. It can refer to just one of these groups as Canaanites, and it can also refer to an ethnic description of the Canaanites. So it's a very, very broad term of what the Canaanites actually are. And we run into it all the time in the scriptures. It's one of the most common geographical, ethnic terms that we find in the scriptures. Canaanites, Canaanites, Canaanites. They're always a problem. But where do they come from? Where do they come from? Well, let's go over to Genesis chapter 10. Right? Genesis chapter 10, it says, and Canaan begat Sidon, his firstborn. Really interesting. So here's the family of Canaan being described for us, and who's the firstborn? Is Sidon. So that's as in Tyre and Sidon, as in Jezebel later on, his firstborn. And Heth is just the Hittites, and the Jebusite, and the Amorite, and the Girgashite, and the Hivite, and the Archite, and the Sinite. And so he goes into some of the Canaanite descendants that settled in the land of Syria as well. If we come down to verse 19, he says, verse 19, he says, and the border of the Canaanites was from Sidon, so up in the top left of the map there, from Sidon, as thou comest to Gerar, so the bottom left of the map, right by the Philistines, that's the border of Canaan, as thou goest unto Sodom and Gomorrah. So Sodom and Gomorrah are part of the land of Canaan. Isn't that interesting? And we know that we don't know exactly, but we believe that Sodom and Gomorrah was located somewhere where the Dead Sea is, or just to the north of the Dead Sea. He says also Admah and Zeboim, both of those cities were destroyed with Sodom, even unto Lasha, and Lasha we believe is in the northeast corner at the top of the map. So it gives us a geographical picture of that. So where does Canaan come from? So that's his descendants. That's where all those nations are. And I think we can see clearly why there's so much confusion as to, is it just the nation of Canaan? Is it his descendants? How come they all have different names? It becomes quite clear here that Canaan is the father, and all these other ites are the descendants of Canaan that inhabit the land. But it also refers to everybody that was in the land at the time when Israel was in the land as well. All right? It's used differently in different verses of Scripture. So, where does he come from? Where does this guy Canaan come from? In verse 20 it says, these are the sons of Ham. Right? So Shem, Ham, Japheth. Canaan goes all the way back to Noah's time. Shem, Ham, and Japheth. One of Ham's sons was Canaan. That's where we start out looking at him. Let's look at the story then that comes to us in Genesis 9. It's one of those confusing stories of Scripture. But I think you'll agree with me once we've gone through this morning that it's really, really an important prophecy given by Noah in this section. So Genesis chapter 9, Noah and his family had come out of the ark. Another generation has passed. And in verse 20 it says, Noah began to be an husbandman. And he planted a vineyard. And he drank of the wine. And he was drunken. And he was uncovered within his tent. It's not like Noah to do this kind of thing. But that's what's happened to Noah. He drank too much, and he was uncovered in his tent. Verse 22, it says, and Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brethren without. So Noah was uncovered. He was naked. And Ham saw the nakedness of his father, and he goes out and he tells his two brothers about it. And I think the point there is he doesn't do anything about it. He just tells his two brothers about that situation. Now we think about nakedness in Scripture, and nakedness is really representative of sin that's uncovered. So I think that makes sense for us there. We're told then that Shem and Japheth took a garment and covered their father's nakedness. And because of this, they are blessed by Noah in these verses. So verse 24, it says, "And Noah awoke from his wine, and he knew what his younger son had done to him. He said, 'Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren.'" Now what's strange about that? Canaan? Why is Canaan cursed and not Ham? Right? We ask ourselves. That just doesn't seem to make sense. It says, "And cursed be Canaan." But what we find, if we look a little bit more closely at this, is that it talks about him being his younger son. He knew what his younger son had done unto him in verse 24. The term younger there actually means little, younger, or youngest, and it can also refer to a grandson. So he's cursing Canaan, and he says he knew what his younger son, and it can be translated not just as younger son, but it can also be translated as his grandson or his little son, as we find there. I've got just a couple of quotes to kind of round that out for us. Here's a quote from the Christadelphian magazine. It says, "The expression in the Hebrew is literally his little son, i.e. grandson, Canaan, and not Ham." So I think that makes good sense for us. One other reference that we looked at was Rotherham's. Rotherham's note says, "Undoubtedly Canaan is who this is talking about, and not Ham. Shem and Japheth, for their piety, are blessed, and Canaan, for some unnamed basis, is cursed." So there's something that Canaan did to Noah when Noah was drunk that resulted in him being naked. Right? End of story. That's all we have. And he says, "And Ham, for his neglect, for not covering up his father, is neglected in this. Shem and Japheth are blessed. Canaan is cursed as a result of all of this." So what's the curse all about? Right? The very first words of Noah are, "Cursed is Canaan." The only words recorded of Noah in all of his life is, "Cursed be Canaan," and the prophecy that follows after that. So what's his point here? Why is this what he's talking about? He says, "A servant of servants shall he be to his brethren." What's that mean, servant of servants? What it means is a servant that is the lowest of servants. The lowest degree of bondage and degradation is what one commentary says. So Canaan, because of what he had done, is cursed to be the lowest of servants, the lowest level of degradation. Canaan is not going to be a ruler. Canaan is always going to be ruled over. And Canaan is going to be below both of his brethren. As we go through this, we'll see that even more clearly. Now, there's an echo here. There's an echo to a woman that had two sons. And she was told that the elder was going to serve the younger. Does anybody know who we're talking about here? Right? Genesis 25. Let's look at that. Genesis 25, here's Rebekah. She's got two children, Jacob and Esau, in her womb. This idea of one brother being a servant to the other brother. And of course, we know that Esau was going to be the servant of Jacob. Now, we know the whole story of Jacob and Esau, so we understand what that's all about. But verse 22 says, "And the children struggled within her, and she said, 'If it be so, why am I thus?' And she went to inquire of Yahweh. And Yahweh said to her, 'Two nations are in thy womb. Two manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. One people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger.'" One group, of course, is going to be stronger than the other. The Jacobs are going to be stronger than the Esau's. And we know why, don't we? We just have to look at the rest of their lives and understand why. We know that Esau was not interested in spiritual things. Not at all interested. He trades his birthright for a morsel of bread, right? Just didn't care about those things. Yeah, people like that are going to be inferior to people that listen to the Word of God. He's a fornicator. He's a profane person, we're told in Hebrews. He had no relationship with God. Same idea, same concept comes to us through there. He's always a servant. He's always a servant of the flesh. That's always what he chooses to follow, the advice that his flesh gives him, and he satisfies the flesh. What about Jacob? Jacob embraces the promises. He loved the promises. And because of that, Jacob ends up ruling over Esau. And of course, in the kingdom, that's the whole message, isn't it? Is that Jacob, the Israels, will rule over the Esau's until the Esau's are completely gone. So I think that's an important principle that we find then. Those people whose focus in life is spiritual will be superior to those people in life whose focus is on carnal or fleshly things. We know that. When I make a decision that's based on fleshly things, the results are usually not too good. When I make a decision in my life and follow that decision and it's based on spiritual things, the results exceed my expectations, right? Not just good, but they're greater than what I even expected would happen. And many of you are nodding. You've experienced that in life where you've made that choice, and maybe you've made it based upon just a little bit of understanding, and the outcome was far greater than what you expected. Same thing applies here. The same idea then that we find with Canaan. All right, so let's come back then and look at Genesis chapter 9. He says, he shall be cursed. It says, cursed shall be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brethren. And there's a summary. Cursed to be a servant of servants. Canaan's ways would make him the lowest of servants. That's what we're being told. That's what Noah is saying. If you're going to follow the ways of Canaan, you are going to be the lowest of servants. That's just the outcome that you can expect. What do we have next? He says in verse 26, blessed be Yahweh Elohim of Shem. Blessed be Yahweh Elohim of Shem. So Canaan is going to be cursed. And now we have Yahweh Elohim of Shem. What does that mean? Yahweh Elohim. If you were to put the Hebrew in there, or the meaning of the Hebrew directly, blessed be he who will be the mighty ones of Shem. And what does Shem mean? Name. Blessed are he who will be mighty ones of the name. What's that telling us? It's telling us that from the family of Shem are going to come the people that take on the name of our Heavenly Father and follow after that. And that group, for that reason, is going to be blessed, as opposed to Canaan, which go the actual opposite direction. So who would you say? Who would you say are the descendants of Shem, if you were to look at the scriptures? Who's the first guy that really comes across as being the descendant of Shem that is blessed? Throw that part in there too. Abraham, right? For sure it's Abraham. Abraham is blessed, descendant of Shem. He comes on the scene, and that's almost the first thing we read about him is that he's blessed. So that prophecy is coming true. That prophecy is absolutely coming true when we look at the rest of the scriptures. It's actually happening just like the scripture said. And we're told that Canaan would be his servant. So Canaan was going to actually serve him. Canaan was going to be given, the land of Canaan was going to be given to whom? To Shem, to Abraham, right? The whole land was going to be actually given in time, in a future time especially, to them. All right, so if we put our summary there, Shem, blessed be Yahweh Elohim of Shem. From Shem would come a people who would be blessed because they manifest God. Simple. Nothing earth-shattering there, but fits with our understanding of how Scriptures works, the rest of Scriptures works, and Canaan and his interaction with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Israel, right? The Israelites. That makes, I think, good sense to us. And they'll be greater than Canaan, Israel would be. All right. Verse 27. And God shall enlarge Japheth. That always puzzled me when I got to that one. If you look in your margin, some Bibles have a different word there for enlarge. The word that they have there for enlarge is to persuade or to open the mind. So what that says is that God is going to open the mind of Japheth. What does that mean? God is going to open the mind of Japheth. He's going to introduce him to the truth, to the gospel, to his promises. He's going to believe those. He's going to accept those. Japheth is. He's going to make those his own. Isn't that interesting? So Shem is going to accept God first and be blessed because of it. And then Japheth is going to have his mind opened at some point in time, and he's going to embrace the promises as well. Very, very cool when we look at that. So what's Japheth? Where's the land of Japheth? Let me see if I can go back to the map here. There's the land of Japheth. Does that look a lot like where the Apostle Paul did his teaching? It looks exactly like that, doesn't it? The land of the Gentiles. And what we find is in chapter 10, and we won't look at this, but in chapter 10, when it's going through the nations, Japheth is actually called the Gentiles. So let's go back to that verse. God shall open the minds of the Gentiles, right? Because Japheth represents the Gentiles. And then it says, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. And he shall dwell in the tents of Shem. The tents of Shem. What is that all about? You know, there's maybe not a better definition of Abraham and his family of sojourners than people that lived in tents. That's exactly what they're called. They're called the people that lived in tents because they were people that were sojourners. Right, just a quick recap there. The Gentiles will have their minds open to the gospel, and they're going to dwell in tents, the tents of Shem. So if you did a word study of the word tent in the book of Genesis, here's what you'd find. Genesis 12, verse 8. Abraham comes into the land of Canaan, and what does he do when he arrives in the land of Canaan? He pitches his tent right there in the land of Canaan. Who's going to serve who, right? That's the point. God says, ultimately, I'm going to bless you. The Canaanites are going to give this land up to you. And then you go through, and there's just passage after passage that talks about the Canaanites. Talks about living in tents amongst the Canaanites. It's really exciting because you've got Lot, and Lot pitches his tent towards Sodom. So he departs from this living in the tents of God, or living with God's influence in his tent, and he goes to the city of Sodom, right? Lot dwelled in cities, and Abraham dwelled in tents. Abraham moved his tent to Hebron. Abraham and Sarah live in tents. We come all the way down to the bottom. In Genesis 35, Israel spreads his tent after Rachel's death. A reference to, of course, the birth of Christ, the son of my right hand. And what happens is the tent is spread so that the Gentiles could come into that same tent once again in Genesis 35. The point is that this idea of tents is connected with Israel because they're sojourners. Hebrews chapter 11 talks about Abraham. Hebrews 11 and verse 9. It says, by faith, Abraham, when he was called to go out into place which after he should receive for an inheritance, i.e. the land of Canaan, obeyed, and he went out, not knowing whither he went. By faith he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and with Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. Those were the ones that loved the truth. You notice Esau's not mentioned here, right? Ishmael's not mentioned here. These are the ones that loved the promises, and they were still dwelling in those sojourning tents, looking for, as it continues, verse 10, for he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. Sojourners. And that's what we are, isn't it? We're sojourners. We're the Japhethites, most of us, sojourning, waiting for that city whose builder and maker is God. Beautiful picture. So they're going to dwell then in the tents of Shem, is what we're being told here, these sojourners. Japheth is going to dwell in those tents with Shem. Now you think about that, and there's a number of verses that all of a sudden start to make a whole lot of sense to us when we think about this idea of tents. There's a verse in Isaiah chapter 54 that talks about the tents being expanded so that the Gentiles can come into those tents. That's exactly what he's talking about. David built a tent for the Gentiles. When he brought the ark up to Jerusalem, he built a tent. And that tent was going to be rebuilt in Acts chapter 15 when they were trying to decide whether the Gentiles needed to be circumcised. That's the basis. They said no, because the tent of the Gentiles is the basis of that, which David was going to build, or David built, is going to be rebuilt. And that's based also on this prophecy from Genesis. So we just have a beautiful picture of this gospel that's being preached to the Gentiles, to the Japhethites. And who does that work? Who goes around persuading people to become Christians? Right? What did Agrippa say to Paul? Almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. Because that's what he did for a living, right? He went around teaching people and preaching to them about becoming parts of the tent of Shem. And he's a Shemite. And maybe the icing on the cake is, what did Paul do for a living? He makes tents, right? He's a tent maker. There's an amazing fulfillment of that prophecy from Genesis about Japheth and what he's going to do. So what we find then is we've got an amazing prophecy. We've got an amazing prophecy of the history of the world almost, right? That the Jews, the Shemites would accept God's teaching. The Gentiles would come into that tent and accept it as well. And the Canaanites are cursed, right? There's the summary of all that. The Gentiles shall join Israel as part of the family of Yahweh. And the Gentiles are also going to be greater than the Canaanites, because Canaanite is going to be his servant. So we've got an amazing fulfillment then of world history. So what does the prophecy tell us then about the Canaanites? Because that's really where we get started, right? The Canaanites are kind of the guys left out, other than the fact that we're told that they're cursed. Canaan never has his mind opened. He never has his mind open to spiritual things like Japheth did. Canaan never comes into the tent like Japheth did. Canaan never becomes a part of the Yahweh Elohim, the people of the name, like Shem did and like Japheth did. He never does these things. So what is Canaan? What do the Canaanites represent? They represent the people that do not have Yahweh as their God. They represent people that do not hear or listen to the words of God. Does anybody know anybody like that? Yeah, they're all around us. And they're becoming more and more and more numerous in the world around us. So let's summarize that idea. Oh, I should go back. The name Canaan itself, right? Canaan was cursed to be the servant of servants. And the word Canaan comes from a word Cana, which means to bend the knee or to humiliate. That's what happens to us if we follow the thinking of the flesh. We will bow down to the thinking of the flesh, and we will be humiliated by the results of bowing down to that. It's translated as bring down low, to bring into subjection, to bring under, to humble oneself, or to subdue. That's what it means to be a Canaanite. So, Canaanites are people that don't listen to God. Canaanites are people that don't know the Word of God. Canaanites are people that instead of following God, because they don't listen to Him, they follow the wisdom of man. Canaanites are people that are the lowest of servants, bending their knees to sin. What are Canaanites today? We have a neat new term. It's not really that new. But here's a term that describes what the Canaanites are today. An outlook or a system of thought attaching prime importance to human rather than divine or supernatural matters. Familiar with that? In seeing man as the highest creature in the universe, responsible to no one but himself, the humanist replaces divine moral standards and principles with human opinions. It's crazy. How could anybody ever choose that? How could we ever choose the foolish ideas of the world around us? How could we follow bad advice when we have such good advice in the scriptures? And yet we all do. We all fall for this kind of teaching, don't we? It gets us easier, more and more easily every day as technology presents Canaanite thinking to us more readily, more easily, more enticingly. It gets into our minds so easily. And soon, and maybe you've noticed this, but soon some of the things that seem to be really, really wrong to you don't seem to be so wrong. Right? They seem like, well, maybe that's not all that bad. Maybe we can accept that. Maybe that's okay. Maybe we should just not say anything about that or do anything about that. Right? Maybe adultery and fornication are such a part of our society that we don't say anything about that. But that's not where we have to end up. That's not where we want to end up. The schools today tell us that there's no God. Our children are taught that, right? That evolution is the answer to everything. Brings us right back to this same idea. The divine principle. We're cursed if we trust in man, and we're blessed if we trust in God. Let's go to Jeremiah chapter 17. I'll steal some of Stephen's notes here. Well, maybe not his notes, but his verses. Jeremiah 17. This is almost like it's written to describe Genesis and Noah's prophecy here. It's almost like it's written just based upon that in Jeremiah chapter 17. It says, "Thus saith Yahweh, cursed be the man that trusteth in man. Cursed is Canaan, he shall be servant of servants." Here they are, here's the Canaanites. "He trusteth in man, and maketh flesh his arm, and whose heart departeth from Yahweh." That's another great description of what happens when you accept Canaanite thinking. "For he shall be like the heath, or a bush in the desert, and shall not see when good cometh, but shall inhabit the parched places in the wilderness." It almost sounds like the blessing given to Esau. "In a salt land, and not inhabited." He's never going to understand the amazingness of God. He's never going to see that because he's in this desert. "However, blessed is the man that trusteth in Yahweh, whose hope Yahweh is. For he shall be as a tree planted by the waters, that spreadeth out her roots by the river, and shall not see when heat cometh. But her leaf shall be green, and shall not be careful in the year of drought, neither cease from yielding fruit." What a difference. The superiority of spiritual things over fleshly things and carnal thinking. There's no contest at all. And then the verse comes up next, the verse we always go to describe our thinking. And interestingly, it's in the context of this cursing. Verse 9, "The heart is deceitful above all things, and desperately wicked. Who can know it?" Yeah, so we can't put our trust in that. We can't put our trust in that at all. Christ talks about the thinking of the flesh. Let's go over to Mark chapter 7. And we'll just kind of conclude our thoughts with his words. He tells us what the thinking of the flesh comes from. What it produces in man, and where it comes from. And he describes for us uncleanness. And the Pharisees in the time thought that uncleanness came from not washing and not following the rituals of washing under the law. He says, oh, no. That's not where uncleanness comes from. Uncleanness comes from the thinking of man. It comes from man's brain, right? We have it around us all the time. That's where uncleanness comes from. And see if you don't recognize what you see on your smartphone, in the news, as we go through this. Mark 7, verse 20. He said, that which cometh out of the man, that defileth the man. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders. We've seen that. You just turn the news on, right? Or you watch a movie. There they are. Thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, and that's unbridled lust is what that means. An evil eye, which is envy. Blasphemy, which is slander and speaking evil of others. Pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within, and they defile the man. Well, this thinking took root in the nation of Israel. And soon the Israelites were doing what was right in their own eyes, following exactly the thinking of the Canaanites. So here we are, brothers and sisters. We've been persuaded by the Word of God. God's opened our minds, hasn't He, as Japhethites, and He's invited us into the tent. We've been given access to the wisdom of the Creator of the whole universe. His wisdom is so far superior. It's the best way that we can live our lives. And yet this infectious Canaanite system, this foolish thinking is all around us. And it's enticing to us. And we fall prey to it sometimes, don't we? It's the system, however, that makes all of its servants the lowest of servants, that humiliates them. We started and we talked about the fact that, sometimes we think we're doing okay. That the way that the brotherhood and families deals with this ramped up teaching of the Canaanites is going to get us through. But what if Christ doesn't return soon? We've got to come up with some better ideas. We've got to come up with some better strategies to fight if we're going to keep the thinking of the Spirit in the forefront of our children's minds. If we're going to keep the thinking of the Spirit in the forefront of our own minds. We've got to come up with some better ways. And that's the challenge for each of us. And that's the challenge of the judges, is how do we, as judges, work with each other to help save each other from the mess of the world that's all around us. And Lord willing, tomorrow we're going to take a look at some examples in Genesis and even in the book of Judges. We're going to take a look at some examples of how people dealt with the Canaanites. And hopefully that'll give us some good ideas to get our thinking started. All right, thank you.